When taking a look back at Bleach as a whole and the legacy of the series, it's impossible to deny the immeasurable popularity of the Espada as villains. As far as villainous groups go, these guys were far and away the most memorable and the most popular of all the Bleach bad guys, leaving an enormous impact on both the fans and the series as a whole. Characters like Ulquiorra and Grimmjow would forever go down as some of the most popular Bleach characters ever to exist, leaving their mark on the series and the fanbase forevermore. And it's really not hard to see why. As far as I'm concerned, the Espada are the perfect examples of Kubo's absolute masterclass in character design work. The man's always been a genius as far as character designs go, something that in my opinion lasted all the way until the end of the series, but the Espada are absolutely top tier, perfect counterparts to the Gote 13. Each of these 10 all-powerful Arrancar look completely distinguishable and unique from one another, with memorable, incredibly well-crafted designs that perfectly showcase their personalities and their powers. As someone who started reading Bleach at the midpoint of the Arrancar arc, right at the apex of the series' popularity, it was incredibly fun and exciting to speculate on who would fight who was ranked where within the Espada, and just enjoying these villains for what they brought to the series. However, with the benefit of hindsight and seeing how Bleach played out through to its end, including the 1000-Year Blood War arc, I can't help but wish the Espada had been handled just slightly differently. I do think as far as villains go, these characters are nearly infallible, but there is one principal mistake that I think Kubo did make with these guys, looking back in hindsight, that I actually think characters in the 1000-Year Blood War arc did better, namely the Sternritter. Now, about 7 months or so ago, I made a video looking at the biggest mistake Kubo made with the Sternritter, so I felt it was only fair now to do one for the Espada. And it's interesting because I feel like these two villainous groups excel in completely different areas. Where the Espada excelled, the Sternritter faltered, and vice versa as well. So in this video I want to take a look at what I believe to be the one principal mistake Kubo made with the Espada, otherwise a fantastic and extremely well done set of bad guys. And that mistake centers around the idea of threat. But before we begin with the video, guys, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to hit that button now, because you are in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week. Don't forget to give the video a like as well if you enjoyed it, because it does really help with the whole YouTube algorithm. And also don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all of my videos. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I do think the Espada were executed nearly perfectly. And they were constantly exciting, intriguing, and compelling bad guys. I loved Kubo's easy to understand criteria for ranking these guys. Number 1 was the strongest, number 10 was the weakest, until Yami's twist happened. But for the most part, it made it really fun and really easy to engage with these guys as an enemy army, and guess who's going to be the most powerful and who would take on who. And for the most part, I really do believe Kubo delivered. I mean, of course he did. There's a reason the Espada are as vastly popular as they are even today. They are still enduringly the most popular Bleach villains by a country mile. But when I say the problem centers around the idea of threat, what I really mean is that the Espada were hyped up both in-universe and by the fans as being immensely powerful bad guys. And unfortunately that meant that for a lot of people the Espada essentially underperformed by the time the Arrancar arc was over. And I think it's especially pertinent when you see what happened in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, that a lot more could have been done to give the Espada a real sense of danger. Now admittedly, put yourself in Kubo's shoes. It is a difficult situation to be in. The first proper arc of Bleach, the Soul Society arc, featured the Gote 13 as the primary antagonists, but they were never really villains, which means the fights can stand to be a little more even. However, once Aizen reveals himself to be the main bad guy and he creates this army of Arrancar, those guys are firmly in the camp of the bad guys, which means they're expected to lose the vast majority of fights. And yet you still need to keep things engaging, so you hype them up as being the most terrifying and powerful bad guys you've had so far, with many of these characters believed to be Vasto Lords, the most powerful form a Hollow can take. Despite the fact that the Espada were supposed to be captain class enemies capable of bringing down Soul Society's strongest, What you actually end up with is a long arc full of a string of Arrancar defeats. The Espada lose basically every single fight they are involved in, and it's a real shame because truly I do think you lose that sense of danger regarding the Espada as the arc goes on. So I want to break it down briefly and just see how this problem affects things moving through the arc. And it's actually not bad at the start of the Arrancar arc where the Espada and the Hollows come across as actual threatening bad guys. Captain class characters like Hitsugaya and Rangiku have to actually use all of their strength to defeat the Arrancar when Grimmjow invades Karakura Town, and Grimmjow himself really comes across as dangerous and nigh on unstoppable. Ichigo himself is absolutely just tossed around like a ragdoll, and it really does hammer home that actually the Soul Society might not stand a chance here. Kubo actually does a really good job with these mini skirmishes at the start of this arc, when characters like Yami and Ulquiorra arrive right at the beginning, and Yami takes on numerous opponents before finally going down, and Ulquiorra is able to counter even Kisuke Urahara's attack. And much later on, Grimmjow returns and still puts up a good fight against Ichigo, while Hitsugaya and his task force mostly lose to Luffy until Hitsugaya manages to score a pretty slim victory. The problems, in my opinion, begin to arise as soon as characters arrive in the Hueco Mundo invasion arc. And this is where the Espada as a whole really come together to start engaging in fights. We move beyond the already established characters like Ulquiorra, Grimmjow and Yami and start introducing the rest of the fighting force. And things mostly start out okay. The fight between Rukia and Espada number 9, Aranero, is emotionally charged and incredibly difficult for her. And although she's an unseated officer and does manage to steal a win, actually killing the first Espada, she nearly dies as a result. And obviously she is stronger than an unseated officer. We know for a fact that she's being held back. But Aranero's death would unknowingly start a chain reaction of Espada losses that would continue until the last one fell. Renji and Uryu engage the 8th Espada Xyloporo Grands in a comically long fight that basically goes absolutely nowhere for the majority of the battle. Meanwhile, Ichigo and the others struggle with both Grimmjow and Ulquiorra. Those two characters are a little different because of the fact their main enemy is always Ichigo. He's the main character, and his battles are held to a slightly different standard to the rest of the Espada that fight supporting characters. And then eventually the 5th Espada, Neutra, shows up and starts causing trouble for Ichigo as well. The Espada have been the villains at this point for quite some time, but we're only really starting to see them actually fight for the first time, and the cracks begin to show as soon as the captains of the Gotei 13 arrive in Hueco Mundo. And that's the part where I really want to start looking at. And don't get me wrong, this is actually one of my favourite scenes in the series, particularly in the anime, with that unreleased OST in the background that I absolutely love that plays when the captains arrive. It's a real turning point for the fighting. But the captains somehow absolutely steamroll these characters. Byakuya defeats the 7th Espada Zomari with almost no trouble whatsoever, and Mayuri does the exact same thing to Xyloporo Grands. 2 Espada are instantly killed with basically no trouble at all. The only one that really does put up a fight is Neutra, who goes up against Kenpachi, but here we really feel that lack of a sense of danger. Neutra hits Kenpachi with everything he's got, and I mean everything. He punches through his gut with his bare hand at least twice. He does major damage to Kenpachi by slicing him, but Kenpachi gets up every single time. Now, while that is Kenpachi's shtick, the fact that he basically can't go down, the closest we get to a sense of danger is Kenpachi telling the reader, "Oh, I might die if I keep this up," and then just winning the fight. It really does feel like it's impossible to kill these guys, and Kenpachi's fight with Neutra is the perfect example of that. There's not really a sense of danger, or whatever sense of danger there was really begins to wane when it looks like the character actually can't be killed. Before we head into the fake Karakura Town arc, we get treated to the Ichigo versus Ulquiorra battle, and truly, that's probably the most despair you actually feel during a fight with an Espada. After all, as I talked about in my video last month, Ichigo is actually killed in this fight. But as I mentioned a minute ago, battles with Ulquiorra and Grimmjow must be held to a different standard because Ichigo simply doesn't play by the same rules as every other character in the series. He is the main character after all. So even after Ichigo is killed by Ulquiorra, he still manages to resurrect and win the day. We then get to the Fate Karakura Town fight, and I believe this to probably be the most egregious of all of these situations. And this is unfortunately the problem with formatting the arc the way Kubo did. You start the arc out by really trying to get across the idea that the Arrancar and the Hollows on the whole are a big threat, but you also only really start with the lower end of the scale, which is natural for storytelling. Aranero puts up a major fight against Rukia, and like I said, it is a gut punch of a battle, and eventually they both go down. But what you end up having here is by staggering the fights with the Espada, you leave yourself the strongest Espada, who should be the toughest to take down, at the point in the story where the Shinigami shouldn't be struggling as much anymore. So the problem is what you get is by building tension right until the Fate Karakura Town arc, that tension is almost immediately swept away when the top three Espada, Harabel, Barragan and Stark, are taken down with nearly very little problem. Barragan is a terrifying opponent with the ability to rot your body to bone immediately, and the worst we get out of him is a couple of arms. Soifon loses her arm, Hachi loses his arm. It's really nothing to worry about in the Bleach universe, and both of these characters come out of the fight the other end barely worse for wear. Soifon even continues fighting Aizen after this. And the same kind of goes for Stark as well. Although he does beat up Love and Rose, they're saved by Kyoraku anyway, so there's really no sense of danger, and Stark is the Primera Espada as well. And then of course the only Espada left at this point is Yami, who despite now being the Zero Espada, is really just continuously played up as one big joke, completely robbing the final Espada of any real tension. And that in a nutshell is my only real problem with the Espada. They had no real sense of danger for almost the entirety of the arc. There was no threat to these guys. And like I said before, it's a difficult position to put Kubo in. People loved the captains and they loved getting cool moments with the captains and seeing the captains pull wins out of the bag. And the Espada being, by virtue, Aizen's underlings were obviously the villains, and therefore they had to lose almost every fight they were in. When an Arrancar actually does manage to win a fight in a blue moon, it feels somewhat superficial. When Choneng Po defeats Ikkaku at the very start of the Fate Karakura Town fight, it's a win with almost no stakes attached to it. Although Karakura begins to return, Komamura and Iba are on the scene immediately to rectify, and then Po is killed anyway. So, and like I said, it's a very tough situation, and this is where I want to begin comparing it to the 1000-Year Blood War arc, because while I do think the Espada falter here, this is one area Kubo nails with the Sternritter, and it is absolutely getting that feeling of threat and danger through. The Sternritter and primarily their boss, Yhwach, are far more proactive when it comes to actually taking the fight to their enemies. The Sternritter and the Vandenreich on the whole make use of the advantages they have against the Shinigami constantly, always turning the tables on the good guys in an arc that generally feels quite oppressive. It's a real big shame, and I honestly think the biggest teller of the fact that the Espada had no threat level whatsoever by the time we got to the Fate Karakura Town arc is the fact that they don't take anyone down. And the fact that Aizen is left to clean up the mess of his Espada is embarrassing. He takes on almost every character in Fate Karakura Town. I get as well that Kubo uses that moment to showcase just how powerful Aizen actually is, but would we really have lost anything by having Stark actually take Love and Rose out of the fight, other than making Stark look better than he does? Barragan could have taken out Hachi or taken out Soifon, something like that, and looked far scarier. I guarantee you that if Stark and Barragan had been villains in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, we would have seen them use their abilities to far greater effect. Respirar would have been everywhere, just absolutely turning foot soldier Shinigami to the bone all across the place, and he would have been a devastating opponent to deal with. Unfortunately, because he's in the somewhat lethargic Arrancar arc when it comes to getting your bad guys to actually get one up on the Shinigami, Baragon doesn't really get an awful lot to do or a great chance to shine, because he never comes across as much of a threat. The Sternritter, on the other hand, have a much better time of it against the Shinigami, taking characters out left, right and centre, which actually makes it feel much more like a well-rounded war where there are real stakes. Take the final section in Varvelt, for instance. Now, these fights are actually universally pretty dang good, and the Schutzstaffel, unlike the top 3 Espada, really live up to their name in my opinion. Although Leelbarrow is defeated, he takes Kyoraku out of the fight. Although Askin is killed, he takes Urahara and Grimmjow out of the fight. And although Pernida is killed, it takes Mayuri out of the fight. You see where I'm going with this? There's no instance where Yhwach has to take on every Shinigami around because none of his underlings could do the job for him. The Sternritter actually get the job done for the most part. They're still not perfect, but there's definitely much more of a threat level with the Vandenreich than there ever was with the Espada. So while I absolutely love the Espada to death, looking back on the series, reading through it, while it is a great time, the Arrancar arc does kind of just feel like a snowball of Shinigami victories that only gets worse as the arc progresses. The Espada do start out as a real kind of scary enemy at the beginning of the series, particularly when they're only coming out every now and then to fight in Karakura Town. When the battle ends up on their turf in Hueco Mundo and Kubo focuses more time in on these guys, giving them more time to shine, most Espada show up for one fight and then they die. And it's a big shame because there really is no real threat that comes from these guys. But that's it for this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you agree with me at all. Maybe you thought the Espada did come across as really threatening. Let me know what you think about the comparison to the Sternritter as well. I want to do a full video on that at some point in the near future, but for now, I really do think that the Vandenreich on the whole were way more dangerous and way more threatening. That being said, nothing can ever take away from the fact that the Espada are truly just some of the best designed characters I think I've ever seen in fiction, really. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that was the one big mistake Kubo made with the Espada. Everything else was nearly flawless, but for me, they could have done with a bit more of a sense of danger about them. But until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. Make sure to hit that sub button for more videos just like this one, and until then, I'll see you next time. See ya.